this video, we're going to learn a couple new roots, all coming from Greek, since we just took a deeper look at the ancient Greek language. These are all pretty basic ones that show up in a lot of English words, and they are terms for pretty basic words. So let's get started. Our first one is Andra, A-N-D-R, and it means man, and specifically man as opposed to woman. Right? We'll learn woman in just a moment here. Now, I do want to point out, in our video on the ancient Greek language, I said that frequently nouns in ancient Greek have two stems, a sort of a base form and a connecting form, and so that sometimes means we have two forms of the root in English. At other times, you only get one because those forms are identical. In the case of Andra, it does have a base stem and a connecting stem. The base stem is aner. It doesn't show up in English, so we're not going to learn it. This is just the connecting stem. And so yeah, it means man. A good word for this is androgynous, and that is having to do with the characteristics of both men and women, because our word for woman is gyne. Now this does have an alternate form, gynek, and again this is from its base form, and this is its combining form. So these mean woman as opposed to man. Right, so an androgynous person has features that look both masculine and feminine, right? Looks like both a man and a woman. We also see our root here in like a gynecologist, right? A gynecologist is a doctor who specializes in the health of women. If we want to talk about a person in general, we use anthrop, right? This is a human being, a person. It's just a person rather than necessarily a man or a woman specifically. It doesn't specify gender at all. And so anthrop we see in things like anthropology, which is the study of human cultures, or philanthropy, which is, it literally means the state of like loving mankind, but philanthropy is acts of generosity, because you love mankind, theoretically. Okay, so these show up in plenty of words in the English language. Next up, we'll do pyre, which means fire. Again, it really only has one form. They're fairly identical. And frankly, if we look at our sort of Grimm's Law, we'll see that pyre and fire are from the same Proto-Indo-European root. Fire is just the Germanic version of pyre in Greek. So hopefully that's easy to remember. Pyre you also may just be familiar with from words in English that you already know. Pyrotechnics is another word for fireworks. It's the study of the art of fire, literally. We'll learn technique eventually. It's a skill or an art. Pyromania or pyromaniac is someone who sets fires compulsively. Then we have the opposite, hydra, right? And this is water. Right, so you see hydra in lots and lots of English words. To hydrate is to make something wet, so to give it water. Hydraulics, right, a form of power fueled by the movement of water. So that shows up in plenty of words as well. Next up, Thay. And I will say it's almost unrecognizable somehow. When you put the O in, I feel like people recognize it more. Theo is God. But of course that O can be used to combine it to another root, but you don't need it at all. So to give you an example, if it does combine with another root, we have something like theology. Theology is the study of religion, study of God, right? But in another case, we have atheism. Atheism is literally the belief in ism. No, a God, Thay, right? So, I mean, it is what it says. So we have Theo, God, shows up in a lot of words having to do with religion. Polytheism, monotheism, so on and so forth. Less religious is dendra, D-E-N-D-R. Dendra is a tree, right? Think of something like dendrochronology, which is the study of dating trees, right? When you cut open the tree and you count the rings and you figure out how old the tree is, and you can study certain aspects of the timeline just by the tree and its growth and things that have affected its growth. But it's in a lot of words having to do with plants. You also see it in some other contexts if you've studied like dendrites or a kind of cell in the body, right? They just look tree-like. They kind of look like they're branching. Okay. Here is a very productive Greek root. Log, L-O-G. So ology comes from a word that means something like, means word, first of all, but it can also mean science or study. And probably overwhelmingly in the English language, you see log as part of a larger suffix, ology, where that O is an infix. And then a person who works there, who works in that field, is an ologist. So biology is the study of life. Biologist is one who studies life. Chronology is the study of time. A chronologist is one who studies the timeline. Okay, so ology and ologist are probably the most common place to find it. You'll find some other words, right? We have a word, for instance, logorrhea. Not a common word, but logorrhea is like excessive talking. It literally means word flowing, right? Like flowing words. They just keep coming out. The person won't be quiet. Okay, another one. This one comes from a verb. This is scop, S-C-O-P, and it means to look, to behold, to consider. We did say when we looked at Greek verbs that they also often have two stems that give us roots in English, the active stem and the passive stem, the doing and the completed stem. This is the active stem. It does not have a passive or a completed stem, at least not one that we use in English words. So we're just looking at an active stem. So it's seeing, looking, beholding, considering, something like that. So it is very frequently used to form a longer suffix, scope, which is used to indicate an instrument that looks at something, right? Microscope, which I've talked about too much in this class. Telescope is an instrument for looking far away. Stethoscope, right? We have many, many different instruments in science that are scopes of some sort. So that's one of the most common places you will see this. And then the last one for this little list is GNO. All right, and it means to know. It actually comes from a Proto-Indo-European root, gno, G-N-O, and the English word know, K-N-O, is just a Germanic form of it. So these are cognates, right? These Greek words that come from GNO and English know, knowing and stuff, they're all cognate because they come from the same Proto-Indo-European root word. And with GNO, I want to stop a moment and talk about something called root extension. So we've been looking at how sometimes I'll talk about a morph and it has two forms, like mater, matra, graph, gram, and we've been talking about why that is. Nouns tend to have two forms, base and combining. Verbs tend to have two forms, present and passive. Active and passive, right? And they have slightly, for the case of the verbs, they have slightly different senses. For the case of the nouns, they're just used in slightly different contexts depending on where the morph shows up in the word. But you can also get other forms of the root or closely related forms of the root through what's called extension. So the idea here is that a Proto-Indo-European root can give rise to multiple words in one language. So if we start with know, this is a Proto-Indo-European root. In Greek, for instance, it gave rise to the verb gignoskein, which means to know, from which we pull off the ending and also the front, and we get that root GNO or GNOS. Diagnosis comes from this, right? From gignoskein, the Greeks then made a noun out of it. The noun is gnosis, and gnosis means something just like knowledge. Right? It is sort of a noun form, to know and then knowledge. And from gnosis, we get a root that we use in a word like astronocy. Not a common word, but it is the study of astronomy. It's more of an archaic or ancient word for it. From gnosis, they made it into an adjective, and they did that by adding a T to nostos, right? And that means knowing. And so from this, for instance, we get our word agnostic. And now it's picked up this T in the root. Okay? It means not knowing, pertaining to not knowing. Now the same Proto-Indo-European root also created the Greek word nomon, which means a judge, and from which we get words like physiognomy, know if you've heard of this, but this is sort of the study of judging people's characters based on the shapes of their body, right? It's an old science. And from nomon, they then derived a second related noun, nome, which is a judgment, right? This is a judge, this is like a judgment, the result of the judge. And from that we get words like gnomic. A gnomic statement is one that sort of imparts wisdom. And so we see different forms of the root here, right? If you're looking at diagnosis, you've got sort of GNO as the base here. In astronocy, GNOS. Here it's GNOM, here it's GNOM, oh, here it's GNOST. And so I've given you GNO, but you may see extensions on it. So these extensions of things like the S, the ST, the M, they, I messed that one up. There we go. Don't worry about that G. They exist because Greek was producing different forms of that Proto-Indo-European root, using it in different contexts as a noun versus an adjective, or taking existing Greek words and creating nouns, deriving nouns, adjectives, other words from it. And they often do that by changing the ending of the root or adding to the ending of the root, which is why we call it extension, right? So you will see, I'm going to teach you this. This is what I'm going to have you memorize as the root for to know. But you can be aware that when you look at an English word, there may be a little bit extra on it, right? That maybe you don't know what to do with. So if you have agnostic, okay, you know the A means not, you know the GNO means no, and you have an IC here at the end, it's an adjective. What do you do with this ST? This is because it's from an extended form of the root, from another related word in ancient Greek that extended that root to use it in a slightly different way. Okay, so that's all the Greek roots we're going to learn, and this idea of extension, which we'll talk about again and look at again in class. But thank you guys for watching. Bye.